Baal stands as one of the most significant and extensively documented deities of the ancient world, whose worship and mythology profoundly shaped religious development across the Mediterranean and Near East for over 2 millennia. Modern scholarship, particularly since the discovery of the Ugaritic texts in 1929, has fundamentally transformed understanding of this Canaanite storm god from biblical villain to crucial figure, whose characteristics, mythology, and cult influenced religious traditions from Mesopotamia to Rome, from Egypt to the Vedic traditions of South Asia. The evidence reveals Baal not as a singular deity, but as a title and divine archetype manifesting across cultures, absorbing and transmitting mythological patterns that would eventually inform Greek, Roman, and even biblical conceptions of divinity. This comprehensive examination demonstrates that understanding Baal requires navigating complex webs of syncretism, political power, agricultural necessity, and theological evolution that span the Bronze Age through late antiquity. The historical Baal emerges most clearly from late Bronze Age Syria. Canaan, approximately 1400 to 1200 before the Common Era, where archaeological and textual evidence converges to reveal a deity whose power derived from control over the single most vital resource in the ancient Levant, rainfall. Unlike the river-irrigated civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, Canaanite society depended entirely on seasonal rains for agricultural survival, elevating the storm god to supreme importance. The name Baal itself, meaning lord, owner, or master in Northwest Semitic languages, functioned as both title and proper name, applied to the storm deity known personally as Hadad or Hadu. The earliest attestation appears around 2500 before the Common Era at Ebla in Syria, where texts reference Hadda, establishing the deity's presence in the 3rd millennium. By the Middle Bronze Age, roughly 2000 to 1600 before the Common Era, Baal worship had spread throughout Canaan with major cult centers at Ugarit, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Hazor, and Megiddo. Geographic distribution extended from Lebanon through modern Israel, Palestine, and western Syria, with the cult reaching its golden age during the late Bronze Age, when Ugarit flourished as a cosmopolitan port city connecting Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Anatolian, and Aegean civilizations. Archaeological excavations at Ras Shamra, ancient Ugarit, accidentally discovered in 1928 when a Syrian farmer's plow struck a tomb, transformed scholarly understanding of Canaanite religion. Systematic excavations beginning in 1929 under Claude Schaeffer uncovered a sophisticated urban center destroyed around 1200 before the Common Era, preserving an unparalleled archive of religious texts. The Temple of Baal dominated the Acropolis, a tower structure approximately 60 feet tall with a small vestibule leading to an inner sanctuary housing the divine image. Adjacent stood a second major temple, possibly dedicated to Dagon, Baal's father, or El, the supreme patriarch deity. The most iconic artifact, the Baal stele discovered in 1932 and now housed in the Louvre, depicts the deity in characteristic pose, a vigorous young god striding forward, wearing only a striped kilt and horned helmet, right hand raised in smiting position holding a mace, left hand grasping a thunderbolt shaped as a spear with vegetation sprouting from its base. A smaller figure, likely the king, stands in prayer before him, dramatically illustrating the power differential between divine and human realms. The wavy lines at ground level represent water or sea, symbolizing Yam, Baal's primordial enemy. This iconography of warrior stance, bullhorns, thunderbolt, and vegetation became the standard template for storm god representation across the ancient Near East. The Baal cycle, preserved on 6 tablets dating to 1300 to 1100 before the Common Era, and written in the innovative Ugaritic alphabet, one of the earliest alphabetic writing systems at approximately 30 characters, provides the most substantial mythological narrative from ancient Ugarit. The epic unfolds in 3 major movements, each addressing cosmic conflicts essential to divine kingship and natural order. In the first movement, Yam, meaning sea or Judge Nahar, seeks kingship over the gods, receiving El's blessing in palace. When Yam demands Baal's surrender, Baal prepares to attack the messengers but is restrained by Anat and Aftart. The divine craftsman Kothar Wa Kassis, dwelling in Memphis or Kaftor, Egypt or Crete, forges 2 magical clubs named Driver and Chaser, specifically designed to defeat aquatic chaos. Baal strikes Yam, scattering him, and is proclaimed king. This combat myth follows a widespread ancient Near Eastern pattern. Sea god seeks dominion. Storm god battles with specially crafted weapons. Victory establishes cosmic order. The second movement addresses palace construction, a crucial element of divine kingship throughout Mesopotamian and Levantine traditions. Following a banquet on Mount Zaphon, modern Jebel Akra, Baal seeks permission from El to build a palace befitting his royal status. After Anat's unsuccessful intercession, where she threatens El with violence, Baal commissions Kothar to craft magnificent gifts for Atharat, also called Asherah, El's consort and queen of the gods. Won over by the offerings, Atharat successfully advocates for Baal. Kothar constructs the palace, though initially without windows, as Baal fears his daughters might escape, or Yam might return. Eventually consenting to windows, Baal thunders through them, announcing his dominion. The palace symbolizes more than royal residence. It represents cosmic order established through the storm god's victory, with windows serving as conduits for life-giving rain. The third and most enigmatic movement involves Mot, meaning death, god of the underworld, sterility, and drought. Offended by Baal's invitation to feast, Mot threatens to devour him. Despite initial resistance, Baal becomes Mot's eternal slave and descends to the underworld. News of Baal's death devastates both divine and earthly realms. El descends from his throne, sits in dust, wears sackcloth, shaves his beard, and beats his chest in mourning. Anat searches desperately for her brother consort, eventually finding his body. With Shamash the sun goddess's aid, Anat buries Baal on Mount Zaphon with elaborate animal sacrifices. Athtar attempts to replace Baal but proves physically too small for the throne, his feet not reaching the footstool, a striking image of inadequacy. Anat descends to the netherworld demanding Baal's restoration. When Mot admits consuming Baal, Anat attacks with ferocious violence, striking with sword, burning, grinding, winnowing, and scattering Mot's remains per birds to consume. El dreams of returning fertility, the heavens raining oil, the wadis flowing with honey, signaling Baal's revival. The declaration that the mighty Baal is alive confirms his return. Yet Mot eventually resurrects, demanding one of Baal's brothers. They fight exhaustingly on Mount Zaphon until Shamash intervenes, warning Mot that El now supports Baal. Mot concedes Baal's kingship, though the cycle implies ongoing seasonal conflict rather than permanent resolution. Baal's epithets reveal his multifaceted nature, rider or mounter of the clouds, later appropriated by biblical Yahweh in Psalm 68 verse 5, emphasizes his mastery over atmospheric phenomena. Alian Baal, meaning victorious Baal, Prince, Lord of the earth, Lord of rain and dew, and Baal Shaman, meaning Lord of heavens, underscore his cosmic authority over weather, fertility, and kingship. Physical iconography consistently depicts a young, vigorous, bearded warrior with bullhorn helmet, raised mace, thunderbolt, and vegetation imagery, symbolizing the integration of destructive storm power and life-giving fertility. Baal's position within the Canaanite pantheon evolved over time. The four-tiered hierarchy placed El and Asherah as authoritative deities in the first tier, Baal and other patron gods as active deities in the second tier, Kothar, Kassis and other craftsman deities in the third tier, and messenger deities like Gupan and Ugar in the fourth tier. Yet the mythology reveals generational tension. El represents the aging patriarch dwelling at the cosmic confluence of rivers, initially opposing Baal's ambitions and favoring Yam, but eventually granting palace permission and ultimately supporting Baal against Mot. This transition from passive elder deity to active warrior god mirrors broader patterns in ancient Near Eastern religion, where dynamic storm gods supplanted earlier creator deities in practical cult worship while nominal supremacy remained with the patriarch. Baal's family relationships prove complex and sometimes contradictory. His father is identified both as El, as god within the pantheon, and Dagon in genealogical tablets, explained by scholars as reflecting role-based versus genealogical descriptions. His primary consort, Anat, the virgin warrior goddess, serves simultaneously as sister, wife, and fierce protector, exemplifying the violent devotion that characterizes their relationship. When Baal dies, Anat's grief transforms into apocalyptic rage, slaughtering Mot with methodical brutality. Baal's three daughters, Pedre, goddess of light and lightning, Tale, goddess of winter, snow and dew, and Arse, goddess of the underworld, personify aspects of weather and seasonal cycles, extending Baal's dominion through divine offspring. The mythology positions Baal in perpetual conflict with forces threatening cosmic order. Yam represents primordial chaos, the destructive, uncontrolled waters that must be defeated to establish habitable space. Mot embodies death, drought, and sterility, the dry season when vegetation withers and agriculture fails. Neither enemy is permanently vanquished. The cyclical nature of these conflicts reflects the annual agricultural cycle where autumn reigns, Baal's victory over Mot give way to summer drought, Mot's temporary triumph. This 7-year cycle motif appears repeatedly, suggesting Baal's victories ensure 7 years of fertility, while defeats bring 7 years of famine. The mythology thus transforms meteorological and agricultural observation into cosmic drama, with human survival depending on divine conflict resolution. Modern scholarship has definitively established that Baal and the Mesopotamian storm god Adad or Hadad represent the same deity, with Baal functioning as honorific title rather than distinct personal name. The linguistic evidence proves compelling. Hadad in Ugaritic, Hadu, Adad in Akkadian, and Ishkur in Sumerian all designate identical storm god traditions across different linguistic communities. The same Sumerian logogram was used interchangeably for Adad and Ishkur, indicating recognized equivalence by ancient scribes themselves. The Amorite migrations during the early 2nd millennium before the Common Era served as the primary vector transmitting storm god worship between Syria, Canaan, and Mesopotamia. Around 2200 to 2000 before the Common Era, massive drought drove Amorite populations from the Levant into fertile Mesopotamian regions. By 2000 before the Common Era, Amorite dynasties controlled major cities including Mari, Babylon, Larsa, Isin, and Eshnunna. The first Babylonian dynasty, founded by the Amorite Sumu Abum around 1894 before the Common Era, and reaching its apex under Hammurabi, 1792 to 1750 before the Common Era, brought West Semitic religious traditions, including Hadad worship, into Mesopotamian mainstream. Shared characteristics between Baal or Hadad and Adad or Ishkur extend beyond linguistic identification to encompass iconography, mythology, and cultic practice. Both controlled thunder, lightning, rain, and storms. Both wielded club and thunderbolt. Both wore bull-horned crowns. Both were depicted as bearded warriors in smiting pose. Both served dual roles as destructive stormbringers and life-giving rain providers. Both were associated with divination alongside sun deities, Shamash or Shapash. Both had bulls as sacred animals pulling divine chariots. The Tel Fekiri inscription, from the 9th century before the Common Era, calls Hadad of Sikon water controller of heaven and earth, who brings down prosperity and provides pasture and watering place for all the lands, precisely mirroring Baal's functions in Ugaritic texts. Cult centers for Hadad or Adad proliferated across Mesopotamia. Aleppo's House of Great Storms served as his principal sanctuary, while Damascus housed a major temple later occupied by the Umayyad Mosque. Temples existed at Babylon, called House of Abundance, Ashur, with a joint temple with Anu called House which hears prayers, and numerous other sites including Sippar, Nippur, and Uruk. The Tel Dan inscription from the 9th century before the Common Era records that Hadad made king the ruler of Damascus, demonstrating the deity's political legitimation function identical to Baal's role in Canaanite royal ideology. While Baal or Hadad represents direct equivalence, connections to Marduk prove more complex and structural. The Babylonian creation epic, Enuma Elish, and the Ugaritic Baal cycle share remarkable narrative parallels. Both feature storm god versus sea deity combat, Marduk versus Tiamat, paralleling Baal versus Yam. Both employ winds and storms as weapons. Both result in divine palace construction. Both establish the victor as king of gods. Both involve ordering cosmos after chaotic conflict. Yet significant differences emerge. Marduk's victory is permanent and includes explicit cosmic creation from Tiamat's dismembered body, while Baal's kingship remains contested and cyclical. This narrative cluster of combat myth, kingship, and palace building appears together first in the Ugaritic Baal epic, circa 1500 before the Common Era, suggesting West Semitic origin later adapted into Mesopotamian tradition rather than simple borrowing from earlier Mesopotamian sources. The storm god Ishkur originated in southern Mesopotamian city-states, Lagash, Adab, and Karkara, during the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, characterized as bringer of plenty and Enki in the world order. Listed as son of Enlil, or alternatively Nana, Ishkur served as inspector of the cosmos associated with the constellation Taurus. His more pastoral character contrasts with northern storm god variant's martial emphasis, reflecting environmental and cultural differences between agricultural regions. Scholarly speculation suggests Enlil's supreme authority in early Sumerian pantheon may have provided the template later storm gods, including Baal, elaborated, with Enlil's traits absorbed by Babylonian Marduk, Canaanite Baal, Greek Zeus, and Roman Jupiter. The Hurrian storm god Teshub and Hittite Tarhunna, or Tarhunt, provide crucial documented links connecting Semitic and Indo-European religious traditions. Teshub headed the Hurrian pantheon, controlling thunder, lightning, rain, and wind, with both destructive and protective aspects. Sacred bulls, Sheri and Huri pulled his chariot, while iconography consistently depicted him with triple thunderbolt, club, and horned crown, identical to Baal's representation. His mythology, preserved in the Kumarbi cycle, narrates how Teshub was born from Kumarbi's split skull after Kumarbi bit off Anu's genitals, a succession myth directly paralleling Greek traditions of Oranos, Cronus, and Zeus, suggesting either shared heritage or intensive cultural exchange. Starting in the Middle Hittite period, Teshub and the Hittite storm god Tarhunna became closely associated due to Hurrian cultural influence on the Hittite Empire. Hittites adopted Hurrian texts about Teshub, sometimes substituting Tarhunna's name, though full conflation remained rare with deities maintaining separate identities. The same logogram was used for both, plus Baal, Adad, and Adad, indicating ancient recognition of functional equivalence despite cultural and linguistic differences. Cult centers included Kume, possibly near modern Zakko, Arafa, modern Kirkuk, Aleppo, and Kumani in Kizawatna, creating a geographic arc from Mesopotamia through Syria into Anatolia. Ugaritic texts provide explicit documentation of Teshub Baal identification. At this cosmopolitan late Bronze Age port, Hurrian and Canaanite religious elements coexisted and merged, with both names used interchangeably in some contexts. Theophoric names from Ugarit demonstrate both traditions coexisting, while the Widener god list from Ugarit directly equates Teshub with Baal. Aleppo served as crucial intermediary. Originally a Hadad or Adad cult center, the city underwent Hurrianization during the 15th to 14th centuries before the Common Era, resulting in the weather god being identified as Teshub while maintaining earlier traditions. At Imar, Teshub and Baal may have been used interchangeably, with Adad remaining the principal name, demonstrating fluid divine nomenclature in mixed cultural contexts. This Bronze Age Anatolian-Syrian contact zone facilitated religious and mythological exchange through multiple mechanisms: dynastic intermarriage, extensive trade routes, military conquest, scribal culture including bilingual and trilingual texts, god lists establishing equivalencies, translation of myths between languages, and religious syncretism with shared cult practices in cosmopolitan cities. The Mitanni Empire, circa 1500 to 1300, before the Common Era, particularly served as cultural intermediary, spreading Hurrian religion westward and facilitating syncretism between Hurrian and Canaanite traditions. While direct historical contact between Baal and Indo-European storm deities like Norse Thor or Vedic Indra cannot be documented, remarkable structural parallels suggest either very ancient common heritage, cultural diffusion through intermediaries, or universal human mythic patterns responding to similar environmental conditions. Proto-Indo-European religion likely included Perkunos, a thunder deity whose name, meaning the striker, or possibly Lord of Oaks, survived in Baltic Perkunas in Lithuanian, Perkons in Latvian, Slavic Perun, Albanian Perendi, and possibly Germanic Fjorgen, Thor's mother, and Vedic Parjanya. Functional similarities prove striking across cultures. Thor wielded Mjolnir, a hammer, as protector deity associated with storms and fertility, slaying Jormungandr, the world serpent, in Norse eschatology. Indra served as king of Vedic gods wielding Vajra, a thunderbolt, defeating Vritra, the serpent blocking waters and causing drought, with his victory releasing life, giving rains. Perun represented the supreme Slavic thunder god with axe and lightning arrows, defeating the dragon god Valus. Taranis embodied Celtic thunder with wheel and thunderbolt. All shared agricultural significance through control over rain, cosmic authority with kingship or supreme status, battle imagery and combat against chaos monsters, fertility associations, where storms enable agricultural abundance, symbolic weapons like thunderbolts, clubs, and hammers, and sacred animals including bulls and eagles. The dragon-slaying motif appears formulaic across Indo-European and Near Eastern traditions. Comparative linguist Calvert Watkins reconstructed a Proto-Indo-European formula. He slew the serpent, with the thunder deity protagonist confronting a multi-headed serpent associated with water, whose defeat releases pent-up waters or torrents. Hittite Tarhunt slays Iluyanka. Vedic Indra slays Vritra, whose name means blocker of waters. Greek Zeus defeats hundred-headed Typhon. Norse Thor battles Jormungandr. Slavic Perun fights dragon form Veles. The Ugaritic parallel proves particularly striking. You have smitten Lotan, also called Leviathan, the evil serpent. You have destroyed the crooked serpent, the mighty one of 7 heads, virtually identical to biblical Isaiah, chapter 27 verse 1's language about Leviathan, demonstrating direct transmission from Canaanite to Israelite tradition. Whether these parallels represent genetic relationship, common Proto-Indo-European heritage, cultural diffusion through borrowing via contact, or universal patterns reflecting similar human responses to natural phenomena, remains debated. The Hurrian-Hittite connection provides documented historical bridge between Near Eastern and Indo-European traditions during the Bronze Age. Bronze Age, Anatolia and northern Syria served as crucial contact zones where Indo-European Hittites and Luwians interacted intensively with Hurrians and Semitic populations, creating conditions for mythological exchange. The explicit identification of Teshub with Baal at Ugarit, combined with Teshub's connection to Anatolian Tarhuna, establishes a plausible transmission pathway. Though this doesn't account for more distant Indo-European traditions like Vedic Indra or Norse Thor, which likely represent either ancient common patterns or independent parallel development responding to similar agricultural and cosmological concerns. Baal's worship in Egypt during the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1075 before the Common Era, demonstrates the deity's adaptability and appeal beyond his Levantine homeland. Likely introduced through Semitic Hyksos contact and formally recognized under the 18th dynasty, Baal became particularly popular from approximately 1400 before the Common Era onward. Major cult centers included Baal Zaphon near Tanis in the northern delta, Memphis, where a temple and priesthood were established, and Pi Ramses, the delta city built by Ramses II, where the cult continued during the 19th dynasty, 1295 to 1186 before the Common Era. In Egyptian contexts, Baal transformed from purely storm deity to god of war and battle, personifying the burning destructive heat of the sun and blazing desert wind, attributes aligning with Egyptian martial needs during their imperial expansion into the Near East. Royal inscriptions provide dramatic testimony to this adoption. At the Battle of Kadesh, circa 1274 before the Common Era, Ramses II described himself as appearing like Seth, great of strength, and Baal himself. Ramses III's war cry was said to be like Baal in the sky, thunder which makes the mountains shake. Ramesside kings routinely referred to themselves as brave and mighty as Baal in heaven, integrating the foreign deity into royal ideology at the highest level. The Egyptian identification of Baal with Set or Seth proved particularly significant. Despite surface parallels between Baal's death and resurrection and the Osiris myth, Egyptians equated Baal with Osiris's murderer rather than the dying and rising god himself. Egyptian scribes included Set's image when writing Baal's name in hieroglyphs. Both deities shared associations with storms, chaos, foreign lands, desert forces, and warrior characteristics. This syncretism operated at official religious levels, not merely popular practice, as evidenced by royal adoption in military contexts. Phoenician colonial expansion throughout the Mediterranean during the first millennium before the Common Era spread Baal worship across the ancient world, creating regional variants that merged with Greek and Roman pantheons. Melkart of Tyre, whose name means king of the city, served as divine patron of Tyrian monarchy, maritime commerce, and colonization. Exported to colonies at Gadir, modern Cadiz, Spain, Kitzion in Cyprus, and initially Carthage, Melkart was identified with Greek Heracles and Roman Hercules. Herodotus visited Melkart's temple in Tyre, describing its emerald and gold pillars, while the pillars of Hercules at the Strait of Gibraltar represent Greek interpretation of Phoenician Melkart pillars at Gadir. This Heracles Melkart cult spread across the Mediterranean, demonstrating successful religious syncretism. At Carthage, Baal Hammon became supreme god by the 5th century before the Common Era following the Battle of Himera in 480 before the Common Era. Partnered with Tanit, called Face of Baal, Baal Hammon symbolically shifted from bull to ram iconography, representing as Baal Karnaim, meaning Lord of Two Horns, worshipped at Jebel Bukarnain. The controversial Tophet evidence, urns with cremated infant remains accompanied by dedicatory stelae, has sparked scholarly debate about child sacrifice practices, with archaeological evidence suggesting possibility while literary sources remain polemical. Under Roman rule, Baal Hammon became African Saturn, demonstrating the deity's continued evolution and adaptation. Greek identification of Baal with Zeus operated on both structural and explicit levels. Both embodied storm god characteristics. Zeus as gatherer of the clouds paralleling Baal's rider of the clouds, both wielding lightning bolts, both achieving divine kingship through combat with primordial forces. Zeus versus Typhon, Baal versus Yam. Mythological parallels extend to succession myths. The sequence, Oranos to Kronos, to Zeus mirrors broader Near Eastern patterns including Mesopotamian Anu to Kumarbi, to Teshub, and Canaanite, El to intermediate to Baal. Hesiod's theogony shows clear Near Eastern influence. Through Aramaean transmission, Baal acquired the Babylonian pronunciation Bel, which became Greek Belos, explicitly identified with Zeus in Hellenistic interpretations. The Roman period witnessed sophisticated syncretism manifesting in two major forms. Jupiter. Heliopolitanus, at Baalbek, ancient Heliopolis in Lebanon, represented direct evolution from Canaanite Baal-Hadad worship. The site featured the largest temple in the Roman world, begun under Augustus in the late 1st century before the Common Era, and completed around 60 of the Common Era. The cult statue described by Macrobius depicted a beardless young man holding whip in charioteer pose and lightning bolt with ears of grain, flanked by two bulls, Hadad's sacred animal, with solar and lunar symbols, synthesizing storm god, solar characteristics, and agricultural fertility. As major oracle center, the shrine was consulted by Emperor Trajan around 114 of the Common Era, accurately predicting his death during the Parthian campaign. Jupiter Dolichenes emerged from Dolice in Comagene, modern Turkey, representing complex syncretism of Hadad Baal, Teshub, Semitic and Hurrian traditions with Roman Jupiter. Popular primarily with the Roman military, from 125 of the Common Era onward, and peaking under the Severan dynasty in the early 3rd century. This mystery cult combined Eastern and Western traditions. At least 19 temples have been identified throughout the Roman Empire, significantly fewer than Mithras, Isis, or Cybele, but demonstrating geographic spread. The cult catastrophically declined when Dolice fell to the Sassanids in 253 to 256, though worship continued in diminished form. Multiple divine traditions converged in Jupiter. Optimus Maximus Dolicanus, Roman Jupiter, Greek Zeus, possibly Armenian Aramazd, Semitic Baal-Hadad, late Hittite Tarhunzes, and Hurrian Teshub, creating perhaps the most elaborate syncretic deity of late antiquity. The Hebrew Bible references Baal approximately 90 times across multiple books, including Judges, Kings, Chronicles, Jeremiah, Hosea, and Zephaniah, establishing the deity as perhaps Israelite religion's most significant theological antagonist. Yet modern biblical scholarship has fundamentally reinterpreted this relationship, demonstrating that pre-exilic Israelite religion was not originally monotheistic, but monolatric, worshipping one god while acknowledging others' existence, with Baal worship representing indigenous practice rather than purely foreign corruption. The earliest major biblical reference appears in Numbers chapter 25 verses 3 to 5, where Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor, resulting in divine anger and plague killing 24,000 people. The Book of Judges establishes a recurring apostasy cycle where Israelites forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtaroth, followed by punishment, repentance, and deliverance. The altar destruction narrative in Judges chapter 6 introduces Gideon's alternative name, Jerubbaal, meaning, "Let Baal contend," while archaeological evidence from 2021 discovered pottery shards from 12th to 11th century before the Common Era. Israel bearing this very name, confirming the term's non-taboo usage in early periods. The Omride dynasty's embrace of Phoenician Baal worship catalyzed the decisive biblical confrontation. When King Ahab married Jezebel of Tyre, circa 874 to 853 before the Common Era, she introduced systematic Baal worship, establishing temples and supporting 450 prophets of Baal. The climactic Mount Carmel showdown in 1 Kings chapter 18 verses 20 to 40 dramatizes the theological stakes. Elijah challenges Baal's prophets to demonstrate their God's power through fire from heaven miracle. From morning to noon, Baal's prophets invoke their deity, dance, and slash themselves with swords, yet there was no voice, nor any that answered. Elijah mocks, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he is in a journey, or perhaps he sleeps and must be awakened." When Yahweh responds with consuming fire, Elijah slaughters all 450 prophets at the brook Kishon, establishing violent suppression of competing religious practices as divinely sanctioned. Yet archaeological and onomastic evidence reveals a more complex historical reality. Ancient Israelites bore names like Jerubbaal for Gideon, Ishbaal for Saul's son, and Beliada for David's son, suggesting Baal originally functioned as acceptable Yahweh epithet. Seals discovered bearing names like Yehovah-al and Bealiah, meaning Yahweh is Baal or Baal is Yahweh, demonstrate identification or close association. The Kuntilite Ajrud inscriptions from the 8th century before the Common Era reference Yahweh and his Asherah, suggesting continued polytheistic or at least monolatric practice with Yahweh paired with a consort, sparking ongoing scholarly controversy about whether Asherah denotes the goddess or merely a cultic object. Frank Moore Cross's influential work demonstrates extensive parallels between Baal and Yahweh. Both control rain, thunder, and lightning. Both are riders of clouds, with Psalm 68 verse 33 and Psalm 104 verse 3 using similar Ugaritic epithet. Both manifest as stormy divine warriors. Both combat sea monsters, Yahweh versus Leviathan, paralleling Baal versus Latan, with virtually identical language in Isaiah, chapter 27, verse 1. Mark S. Smith argues Yahweh was more likely to be inspired by Baal rather than El, since both are stormy divine warriors lacking El's pacifistic characteristics. Psalm 29, with its storm theophany imagery, may represent an adapted Baal hymn transferred to Yahweh worship. The Babylonian exile, 586 to 538 before the Common Era, marked the decisive transformation from monolatry to strict monotheism. Pre-exilic archaeological and textual evidence demonstrates widespread Baal worship among Israelites, with the deity possibly identified with Yahweh in popular religion. During and after the exile, biblical texts were written and heavily redacted to emphasize exclusive Yahwism, transforming Baal from rival deity to false god and eventually demon. The identity crisis precipitated by Babylonian conquest necessitated clear religious boundaries preventing assimilation. Only after the Babylonian exile, around the 6th century before the Common Era, did Judaism turn into a fully monotheistic faith without room for other deities. Prophetic literature reflects this evolving polemic. Hosea chapter 2 verses 16 to 17 preserves the transitional moment, "Thou shalt call me Ishi," meaning my husband, "and shalt call me no more, Baali," meaning my Lord. For I will take away the names of Baalim out of her mouth. Jeremiah's repeated condemnations link Baal worship with moral corruption and child sacrifice at high places of Baal, though modern scholarship questions whether these practices were as widespread or inherent to Baal worship as biblical polemic suggests. The violence justified against Baal worshippers, Deuteronomy chapter 13 verses 6 to 10 mandates execution of family members promoting other gods. 2 Kings chapter 10 verses 18 to 28 praises Jehu's mass killing, reveals the theological stakes in maintaining religious boundaries. Post-exilic Jewish tradition continued Baal's demonization. The Talmud Sanhedrin tractate provides shocking descriptions of Baal PR. Worship involving defecation before the idol, likely polemical exaggeration designed to render the practice utterly contemptible. Names containing Baal were systematically changed to include Bosheth, meaning shame. Jerubbaal became Jerubasheth. Eshbaal became Ishbosheth in Chronicles. Rabbinical interpretation framed Baal as the ultimate covenant breach, the paradigmatic other against which Jewish identity was defined, particularly crucial for post-exilic Judaism establishing boundaries between acceptable and forbidden practice. Christianity transformed Baal into Beelzebub, or Beelzebul, prince of demons. The name, possibly from Baal, Zebub, meaning Lord of Flies, from 2 Kings chapter 1 verses 2-3, God of Ekron, or Baal, Zebul, meaning Prince Baal, appears in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew chapter 12 verses 24-27, Mark chapter 3 verse 22, Luke chapter 11 verses 15-19, when Pharisees accused Jesus of casting out demons by Beelzebub, the prince of demons. This theological shift positioned Baal not as rival deity, but as demonic hierarchy's leader, identified with or subordinate to Satan. Patristic literature, 2nd to 8th centuries, developed comprehensive demonology, treating all pagan gods as demons. Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and Origen emphasized that demons, when exorcised in Christ's name, confess they are the gods worshipped by pagans, demonstrating Christianity's superiority. Medieval demonology elaborated this hierarchy. The Testament of Solomon portrays Beelzebul as prince of all demons associated with Venus, causing destruction through tyrants, jealousy, and murder. The Lantern of Light, 1409-1410, associated Beelzebub with envy, while Sebastian Michaelis in 1612 placed him among the three most prominent fallen angels alongside Lucifer and Leviathan. Milton's Paradise Lost depicted Beelzebub as Satan's second-in-command, while grimoire traditions described Baal as first and principal king of hell ruling the east and commanding 66 legions of demons. Islamic tradition presents Baal concisely but definitively. Surah As-Saffat, chapter 37 verses 123-132, narrates how Elijah confronted his people. Do you call upon Baal and leave the best of creators, Allah your Lord and Cherisher? Islamic commentators identify Ilyas as sent to Baalbek during King Ahab's reign, paralleling biblical narrative. Al-Thalabi described Baal as a golden idol, 20 cubits, 9 meters, tall with 4 faces, while Ibn Kathir identified him as a fertility and weather deity. The Quranic emphasis positions Baal as exemplifying shirk, polytheism or idolatry, the ultimate violation of Tawhid, Islamic monotheism. The narrative confirms shared prophetic tradition across Abrahamic religions, while emphasizing Allah's supreme creative power versus impotent idols. The discovery of Ugarit in 1929 revolutionized scholarly understanding, prompting one writer to declare, in the Atlantic Monthly, no archaeological discovery, not even that of the Dead Sea Scrolls, has had a more profound impact on our understanding of the Bible. Modern Baal scholarship has fundamentally reshaped comprehension of ancient Near Eastern religion and biblical origins, moving from assumptions of Israelite religious distinctiveness to recognizing deep Canaanite roots. Mark S. Smith's evolutionary model, developed across multiple landmark works, The Early History of God in 1990 and 2002, The Origins of Biblical Monotheism in 2001, The Ugaritic Baal Cycle with Wayne Pittard in 1994 and 2009, proposes a convergence differentiation process. During the convergence phase, the Judges period through early monarchy, Yahweh, originating possibly in Edom, Midian, or Teman as warrior. God was assimilated into highland Canaanite pantheon headed by El, absorbing attributes from El as patriarch deity, Baal as storm god, and Asherah as mother goddess. The differentiation phase, 9th century before the Common Era through Babylonian exile, witnessed Yahweh cult separating from Canaanite polytheism through prophetic reforms, Elijah and Hosea, and royal initiatives like Josiah's reforms, with full monotheism emerging during the exilic and post-exilic period. John Day's comprehensive synthesis, Yahweh and the Gods and Goddesses of Canaan from 2000, examines detailed relationships between Yahweh and the Canaanite pantheon, assessing what Yahwism assimilated versus rejected, and documenting the process of achieving monotheism from polytheistic background. Nicholas Wyatt's translations and commentaries on approximately 50 Ugaritic tablets, including the complete Baal cycle, made these crucial texts accessible to broader scholarly audiences while exploring tensions between myth as mindset versus literary genre. The dying and rising gods debate exemplifies ongoing scholarly controversies. J.G. Fraser's Golden Bough established this category, but by the 1990s, near consensus emerged against it. Mark S. Smith's 1998 article argued against Baal's death in the cycle lacks clear resurrection narrative. A 40-line lacuna creates interpretive gaps. Ritual language derives from royal funerary cult rather than agricultural cycle, and no unambiguous ritual reenactment exists. Methodologically, Smith critiqued combining data across millennia and cultures, arguing Fraser imposed Christian resurrection frameworks on ancient material. Trygve Mettinger's The Riddle of Resurrection from 2001 counter argued that Baal explicitly dies descending to Mount vegetation and rain cease at his death. The declaration, "Mighty Baal is alive," implies resurrection. Seasonal and agricultural connections remain clear, and Anat's defeat of Mount leads to Baal's return, signaled by El's dream of renewed rain. While rejecting Fraserian typology, Mettinger maintained dying and rising motifs exist in Dumuzi, Baal, and Melkart, typically tied to seasonal cycles with ritual involvement and pre-Christian origins. This debate remains unresolved, depending on interpretation of fragmentary texts with broader implications for comparative mythology. Methodology. Wayne Petard's research utilizing computer imaging and macro photography revealed previous scholarship emphasized sexual content influenced by biblical polemic, portraying Canaanite religion as heavily sexual. Petard and Smith found very little of that in this story, concluding it's not as titillating as previous scholars have wanted to make it, demonstrating how theological bias affected academic interpretation. Aaron Tugendhaf's Baal and the Politics of Poetry from 2018 challenges viewing the Baal cycle as royal propaganda, arguing instead it represents meditation on kingship's limitations during late Bronze Age political breakdown, portraying kingship as contingent and ambiguous rather than celebrating divine right. This political reading exemplifies newer approaches examining social contexts and ideological functions of ancient texts. The Kuntilet Ajrud inscriptions controversy continues dividing scholars. Phrases referencing Yahweh of Samaria or Temen and his Asherah spark debate whether Asherah denotes goddess consort or cultic object, wooden pole or symbol. William Deaver and others argue for goddess interpretation, suggesting widespread Yahweh-Asherah pairing in popular religion. Conservative scholars favor cultic object interpretation, citing grammatical issues with pronominal suffixes on divine names. The final report's 2012 publication intensified, rather than resolved debates, with archaeological evidence demonstrating pre-exilic Israelite religion included practices later deemed heretical. Contemporary scholarship employs sophisticated interdisciplinary methodologies. Comparative mythology identifies shared motifs while avoiding fallacies through differential comparison. Archaeological approaches integrate ceramics, architecture, iconography, and epigraphy with textual evidence. Philological methods utilize high-resolution digital photography for tablet analysis and reconstruction. Post-colonial critiques examine how Western scholarship's colonial foundations influenced interpretations. Digital humanities projects, database construction for Ugaritic texts, and computational linguistic analysis promise further advances. Major unresolved questions persist. Was the Baal cycle cultic text or literature? What precise social historical factors drove monotheism's emergence? How uniform was Baal worship across the Levant? Was Asherah goddess, symbol, or both in different contexts? How did mythological transmission occur specifically? What was the definitive order of Baal cycle tablets? These questions ensure the field's continued vitality, with fragmentary evidence requiring speculative reconstruction and interdisciplinary tensions between biblical scholars, ancient Near Eastern specialists, and archaeologists producing productive disagreement. Baal's significance transcends individual ancient religions to illuminate fundamental patterns in religious development, cultural exchange, and theological evolution. The deity exemplifies how storm god worship, responding to agricultural societies' dependence on rainfall, emerged independently across Eurasia, while also transmitting through documented historical contact. The Hurrian Hittite intermediary, explicitly linked Near Eastern Baal and Hadad, and Anatolian Indo-European traditions like Tarhuna during Bronze Age, with Ugaritic texts documenting Teshuv Baal identification. Whether broader Indo-European parallels like Thor, Indra, and Perun represent common Proto-Indo-European heritage, diffusion from single origin, or universal human mythic structures remains debated. But Bronze Age contacts certainly allowed reinforcement and cross-pollination of traditions. The archaeological and textual evidence. Ugaritic tablets, Phoenician inscriptions, Mesopotamian god lists, biblical polemics, Greek and Roman syncretism, demonstrates ancient Near Eastern religions formed interconnected systems rather than isolated traditions. Religious syncretism operated as normal practice, with Greek and Roman cultures systematically identifying foreign deities with Greco-Roman equivalents based on shared attributes. This syncretism proved remarkably successful and enduring, allowing Baal worship to persist in transformed guises through the Roman period, yet simultaneously contributed to erosion of original Semitic identities, as Baal Hammon became primarily known as Saturn or Melkart as Hercules. For biblical studies, Baal research contextualizes Yahweh's development, revealing storm god imagery in Psalms and prophets paralleling Baal traditions, explaining biblical rejection of Baal through genuine religious competition, demonstrating gradual evolution from monolatry through henotheism to monotheism, rather than original Israelite distinctiveness, and illuminating how exile served as crucial period for theological consolidation. The transformation from potential Yahweh epithet, Baali and Hosea, to ultimate false god to demonic prince charts. Judaism's and Christianity's identity formation through opposition, using Baal as constitutive other against which monotheistic identity was defined. The comprehensive evidence, spanning archaeological remains from Ugarit to Baalbek to Carthage, textual sources from cuneiform tablets to biblical manuscripts to Quranic verses, iconographic representations from the Baal stele to Roman Jupiter statues, and linguistic data from Sumerian logograms to theophoric names, establishes Baal as one of antiquity's most documented and influential deities. Understanding Baal requires navigating complex syncretisms where title became name, local manifestations proliferated while maintaining core identity, agricultural necessity elevated storm gods to cosmic kingship, and religious boundaries remained fluid until monotheistic movements imposed exclusivity. Modern scholarship's achievement lies in moving beyond polemical frameworks, whether biblical condemnation or romantic paganism, towards sophisticated appreciation of how ancient peoples constructed divine worlds responding to environmental realities, political necessities, and existential questions about cosmic order, death, fertility, and power. The Baal cycle's enduring power derives not from primitive superstition, but from profound meditation on kingship's fragility, nature's cyclical violence, and the ongoing struggle between order and chaos that remains philosophically and existentially relevant. As Wayne Petard's research reveals, removing centuries of interpretive bias exposes texts less titillating but more politically and theologically sophisticated than previously imagined. The study of Baal illuminates how religions emerge, evolve, compete, syncretize, and transform across centuries and cultures. From Bronze Age Ugarit's cosmopolitan port to Ramesside Egypt's imperial temples, from Carthaginian Tophets to Roman mystery cults, from biblical polemic to medieval demonology to modern archaeological reconstruction, Baal's journey maps humanity's changing relationships with divinity, power, nature, and identity. The deity who rode clouds and wielded thunderbolts remains central to understanding not only ancient Canaanite religion, but the formative processes of biblical monotheism and the broader patterns of religious development that shaped Western civilization. In this sense, Baal represents far more than a single ancient god. He embodies the dynamic, contested, ever-evolving nature of religious thought itself.